Imagine going on a strict, like medically supervised diet and exercise plan for 10 straight years. You track literally everything, you put in the physical work, and you drastically change your lifestyle.
Yeah.
Only to find out a decade later that all of that effort didn't significantly lower your risk of having a fatal heart attack any more than just, getting standard medical advice.
Right. I mean, it sounds completely impossible based on everything we are taught about health.
Yeah.
But that is exactly what one of the largest clinical trials in modern medical history actually found.
Wow.
And the reasons behind it, they completely upend how we understand weight, metabolism, and, well, cardiovascular risk.
Today, we are tuning out the Instagram wellness influencers, the miracle fad diets, and, those boot camps promising to melt away 30 pounds in a month.
Yeah.
We are cutting straight through the noise to look at the actual clinical reality of adult obesity management. We're pulling from a massive, really comprehensive medical overview detailing the evidence-based therapies for obesity, tracking this from, ancient history to the absolute cutting edge of modern science. So, okay. Let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Because there is a staggering amount of data to get through today. And we want to figure out not just how weight loss is approached medically, but the underlying biology of why it actually matters for you.
Right. And we are going to synthesize these really dense clinical guidelines into the actual mechanisms of human health. Instead of just looking at, what happens on a bathroom scale, we need to examine what happens at a cellular level.
Yeah, the real science.
Exactly. Why certain modern treatments are rewriting the rule book, and what the clinical data actually proves about long-term survival.
Let's start with how we even define what we're treating, because I think it's tempting to think of obesity as a strictly modern byproduct of, ultra-processed food and sitting at an office desk all day.
Which is a huge part of it now, obviously.
Yeah, of course. But our sources point out that the medical profession has recognized the dangers of excess weight for more than 2,500 years, dating all the way back to Hippocrates. So the ancient Greeks knew there were health implications. But the way we medically categorize it today has a surprisingly unmedical origin.
Right.
Our modern concept of a normal weight range actually stems from actuarial data.
Which is to say, the life insurance industry.
Life insurance, yeah.
Yeah, by looking at massive data sets, early life insurance reports were really the first to formally suggest that lower body weight strongly correlated with a longer lifespan and, fewer payouts for chronic disease.
Follow the money.
Always.
Yeah.
And that early actuarial data really laid the groundwork for how we categorize weight today.
Yeah.
It eventually led to the body mass index, or BMI, which was then corroborated by major health tracking systems later on.
And we've all encountered those BMI thresholds at the doctor's office. The guidelines categorize a BMI of 25 to 29.9 as overweight and a BMI of 30 or higher as obesity. And then there's class 3 obesity, which kicks in at 40 or at 35 if you have weight-related health conditions. They also make a point that for Asian populations, clinical interventions are often considered at a lower threshold, starting at a BMI of 23.
Yeah, that's due to how different populations store visceral fat, which is really critical.
But, I have to challenge this rigidity a bit. If these categories are essentially rooted in old insurance tables, isn't a BMI of exactly 30 just an arbitrary line in the sand?
Right.
Like, if I'm at 29.9, I'm overweight, but the second I hit 30.0, I suddenly cross into a different pathological category. That doesn't sound like a precise biological measurement to me.
You're right, and the clinical guidelines totally acknowledge that limitation. A BMI of 30 is not like a biological switch that suddenly gets flipped in your body.
Okay.
Those categorical numbers are just standardized frameworks. It's so that doctors, researchers, and insurance companies have a shared language for treatment protocols. In reality, the health risks operate on a continuum.
A continuum, right.
Yeah, it is not a sudden cliff you fall off when the calculator hits 30. It's a gradually increasing slope of physiological risk.
So I'm looking at that slip of risk, and the sources heavily link higher BMI to type 2 diabetes, hypertension, abnormal lipid levels in the blood dyslipidemia, and coronary artery disease.
Yeah.
But what I don't understand is why a few extra pounds triggers such a massive cardiovascular cascade. What is the actual physical link there? Why does just storing extra energy break the system?
So we used to think of fat adipose tissue as just inert energy storage, like a biological savings account.
Just sitting there waiting for a rainy day.
Exactly. But we now know that adipose tissue is a highly active endocrine organ.
Really? An organ?
Yes. When fat cells become enlarged and dysfunctional, particularly the visceral fat around your organs, they don't just sit there. They actively secrete inflammatory chemicals called cytokines directly into your bloodstream.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and this chronic low-grade inflammation actually damages the lining of your blood vessels, which drives the hypertension and coronary artery disease.
So it's literally attacking the vessels.
Right. And it also interferes with how your muscles and liver respond to insulin, which is the direct biological mechanism driving type 2 diabetes.
That makes the stakes so much clearer. It isn't just about carrying extra weight. It's about carrying an organ that is actively pumping out inflammation.
Exactly.
Which brings us back to that mind-bending paradox we started this deep dive with, the look-ahead trial.
Ah,
So
yes.
AHEAD stands for Action for Health in Diabetes. Researchers took over 5,100 individuals with type 2 diabetes and a BMI over 25, and they split them up.
Right.
One group got an intensive lifestyle intervention, regular meetings, a strict diet, exercise plans. The other group just got standard diabetes education, and they tracked them for almost 10 years, 9.6 years to be exact.
Right. And when they looked at the primary composite outcome, meaning the combined rates of death from cardiovascular causes, non-fatal heart attacks, and non-fatal strokes, the results between the intensive lifestyle group and the control group were functionally similar.
That's just wild to me. Almost 10 years of intensive supervised diet and exercise didn't significantly lower their risk of a heart attack compared to standard advice. How is that biologically possible if we just establish that fat creates the inflammation driving the disease?
Well, the standard medical therapies essentially neutralized the difference. The control group wasn't just left to fend for themselves. They were receiving highly effective modern medical care for their symptoms.
Oh, right. Drugs.
Exactly. They were taking statins for their cholesterol and antihypertensives for their blood pressure. Furthermore, over a decade, the control group naturally lost a little bit of weight as well. By the end of the trial, the difference in weight loss between the two groups was a mere 2.5%.
Just 2.5% difference after a decade.
Yeah.
But the researchers did find a silver lining when they really dug into the data. For the participants who lost more than 10% of their body weight in the first year, there was a massive 20% risk reduction in major cardiac events and death.
Which is huge.
And in similar trials looking at clinician-supervised weight loss, they reported that type 2 diabetes actually went into remission in about 50% of the patients.
And they achieved those incredible results while requiring fewer cardiovascular medications than the control group.
It makes me think of an analogy. Let's say your body is a house with a leaky roof. Taking statins and blood pressure meds is incredibly effective. It's like putting heavy-duty buckets under the leaks.
Right.
You're managing the symptoms perfectly. The floors aren't getting ruined, which is exactly what happened with the look-ahead control group. But losing that 10% of your body weight,
Yeah.
because fat isn't just inert storage, it's the actual source of the inflammation. Losing the weight isn't just repairing the roof, it's stopping the rain itself. You are shrinking the cells that are producing the inflammatory water.
What's fascinating here is that when you stop the rain, the benefits extend everywhere. The guidelines highlight improvements far beyond just the cardiovascular system.
Like what else?
While patients see massive reductions in obstructive sleep apnea, largely because you are removing the physical, mechanical weight of tissue pressing down on the airway during sleep.
Oh, that makes sense.
And we see improvements in osteoarthritis too. Not just because there's less mechanical load on the knees, but because there is less systemic inflammation aggravating the joints. The structural integrity of the entire house improves.
Which naturally brings us to the hardest question. How do we actually achieve that 10% reduction? Because there is a massive disconnect between clinical reality and patient expectations here.
A huge disconnect, yeah.
The sources point out that significant health benefits, like real reductions in disease risk, kick in with as little as a 5% loss of body weight. But when a patient walks into a clinic, they don't usually ask to lose 5%.
No, they want a 30% reduction.
Right, they want an aesthetic transformation. And the medical guidelines bluntly state that a 30% loss is rarely achievable without surgery or the newest biologic drugs.
That gap between a clinical health goal of 5 to 10% and an aesthetic goal of 30% is really the central tension in obesity management today. But for the baseline treatment, the foundation for everyone is always comprehensive lifestyle intervention.
Let's talk about the Diabetes Prevention Program, or DPP, because it is a massive success story for lifestyle intervention.
It really is.
They took patients and put them on a diet that strictly restricts daily calories, a hypocaloric diet, along with 150 minutes of exercise per week, like brisk walking. That protocol resulted in a 58% risk reduction for progressing to type 2 diabetes.
And to put the power of that into perspective, the group in that same study given metformin, a standard diabetes medication, only saw a 31% risk reduction.
Wow.
Yeah. The lifestyle modifications were nearly twice as effective as the drug at stopping the biological onset of the disease.
But the nuance of that diet is where people get incredibly tripped up, constantly searching for the perfect macro breakdown,
Well, it's not.
But the clinical data cuts right through that noise. Dietary adherence is the primary predictor of weight loss. It does not matter if it is low carb, Mediterranean, or intermittent fasting. It is about consistently reducing your energy intake below your energy expenditure in a way you can actually sustain.
The mechanism of the calorie deficit drives the loss, regardless of the vehicle. But the guidelines do mandate one specific dietary rule.
Which is?
During active weight loss, your body doesn't just burn fat. It will actually cannibalize muscle mass and bone mineral density for energy if you aren't careful.
Yikes.
Yeah, to prevent this, they advise consuming 1 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of ideal body weight to maintain that essential lean mass.
And what about the gym? The cultural narrative is always,
Yeah.
grind in the gym to melt the fat.
Right, now train a bad diet.
Exactly. But the medical reality check is that exercise is significantly less potent than dietary restriction for active weight loss. However, it is the strongest predictor of weight loss maintenance.
Yes, maintenance is key here.
To use another analogy, if renovating your body is like renovating a building, the calorie deficit is the demolition crew. The diet actually removes the excess weight, but the exercise is the maintenance crew.
I like that.
They keep the foundation from crumbling, they preserve the structural steel, the lean muscle we just talked about, and they ensure the building stays stable once the demolition is over.
And we see the sobering reality of what happens when that maintenance crew goes on strike in the clinical data.
What happens?
Well, a meta-analysis of 22 behavioral weight loss studies looked at commercially available programs. Participants averaged just over a 4% weight loss compared to a 1% loss in the control groups.
Only 4%.
And that behavioral effect generally peaked at 6 months.
Man, a 4% weight loss. If you're listening to this and feeling incredibly demoralized that dedicating your life to a commercial diet might only yield a 4% drop, you aren't alone.
Not at all.
This is exactly why the medical community had to look beyond just telling people to eat less and move more. If lifestyle maxes out at 4%, but we know we need at least 10% to repair the metabolic roof, how is modern medicine bridging that massive gap?
We escalate to pharmacotherapy and bariatric surgery. The guidelines state that medical intervention can be considered for patients with a BMI over 30 or over 27 if they have weight-related comorbidities.
Right.
And this brings us to the GLP-1 receptor agonists, drugs like semaglutide and tirzepatide, which have completely revolutionized the field.
The numbers are just staggering. In clinical trials, tirzepatide showed a mean weight loss of 20.9% at 1 year.
Incredible.
Over 1/3 of the participants lost 25% or more of their body weight. But how do they actually work? We hear these drug names everywhere, but what are they physically doing inside the body to double or triple the results of a strict diet?
So GLP-1 stands for glucagon-like peptide 1. It is an incretin hormone that your gut naturally produces when you eat. These medications synthetically mimic that hormone, but they last much longer in the body.
Okay, so what does that do?
They do two crucial things. First, they dramatically slow down gastric emptying, meaning food literally stays in your stomach longer, keeping you physically full.
Got it.
Second, and more importantly, they cross the blood-brain barrier and target receptors in the hypothalamus, which is the appetite center of the brain. They send a continuous, powerful biological signal that you are satiated. They effectively shut off the food noise, that constant, intrusive psychological craving for calories.
So you're basically replacing willpower with a biological override.
Exactly.
And at a 20.9% weight loss, these drugs are rapidly approaching the historical gold standard of obesity treatment, which is bariatric surgery.
All right. Bariatric surgery mechanically alters the digestive tract to restrict food intake and change gut hormones. Procedures like gastric bypass can achieve up to a 40% weight loss at 12 to 18 months, with generally better long-term maintenance than older non-surgical approaches.
So we basically have a direct showdown here. The GLP-1 injections versus the scalpel.
Yeah, a real showdown.
The sources detail a network meta-analysis of 139 randomized trials showing that bariatric surgery is still the absolute most efficacious option for long-term weight loss.
It is.
But a separate study, a propensity-matched cohort study, which essentially means researchers carefully matched similar patients to compare outcomes, fairly found that tirzepatide was actually associated with lower all-cause mortality and a lower risk of major kidney and cardiovascular events compared to surgery.
Which creates a highly complex matrix for a patient and their doctor. Surgery has the decades-long track record for massive, durable weight reduction, and analyses suggest it might be more cost-effective over a lifespan compared to paying for expensive biologic drugs every single month.
True, those drugs are not cheap.
No, they aren't. But the medications offer incredible systemic metabolic benefits without the permanent anatomical changes and physical risks of surgery.
It's essentially a chemical bypass, but that brings up the massive caveat explicitly stated in the guidelines. What happens when a patient stops taking the injection?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the most critical paradigm shift in obesity medicine right now. Before a doctor writes a prescription for a GLP-1, they are instructed to counsel the patient that this is intended for long-term chronic use.
Meaning for the rest of their life.
Yes, because obesity is a chronic physiological disease, not a temporary state. Just as you wouldn't stop taking your blood pressure medication once your blood pressure normalizes.
Because the hypertension would just return.
Exactly. You shouldn't stop taking the obesity medication once your weight drops. The clinical data clearly shows that discontinuation results in rapid weight regain. The underlying biological drive, the food noise, the hormonal imbalance hasn't been cured. It's merely being managed by the presence of the drug.
So we have lifestyle interventions maxing out around 4% on one end, and lifelong biologic drugs or major anatomical surgery on the other.
Right.
Is there a middle ground for patients who don't qualify for surgery or who simply can't afford a lifelong GLP-1 prescription, since insurance coverage is, frankly, notoriously spotty?
There is. The clinical middle ground relies on medical devices, typically for patients with a BMI between 25 and 55. One approach involves intragastric balloons.
Balloons inside the stomach.
Yeah, these are saline-filled balloons placed endoscopically down the throat or sometimes swallowed as a capsule that simply take up physical space in the stomach.
Oh, I see.
The mechanism is pure volume displacement, creating early satiety. They induce roughly 6 to 15% weight loss, but they must be removed after 6 months, which unfortunately often leads to weight regain.
The sources also mention endoscopic sleeve gastroplasty. Rather than making surgical incisions, a doctor goes down your throat with a suturing device and literally stitches the stomach into a smaller, tubular shape. It physically restricts the volume of food you can eat, producing a 13 to 20% weight loss at 12 months.
And those are clinically validated medical procedures. But human nature is constantly seeking the path of least resistance.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because you can walk into any pharmacy right now, and there is an entire aisle of over-the-counter dietary supplements.
Oh, the supplement aisle.
Gargum, green tea extracts, chromium, chiatocin. People spend billions of dollars on these products every single year.
Yeah.
But the medical overview has a glaring header that literally says, no role for dietary supplements.
The clinical guidelines advise completely against their use. The evidence supporting the physiological efficacy of these supplements is virtually non-existent. And far more concerning, their safety profile is entirely unregulated.
They bring up ephedra or mahuang as the ultimate cautionary tale. It was a hugely popular weight loss supplement that had to be actively pulled from the U.S. market by the FDA because it was causing severe cardiovascular events, literal heart attacks and strokes.
Yes, it was dangerous.
If the clinical data explicitly says these things do not work, why is the supplement industry still booming?
Because of the agonizing gap we just discussed. There's a massive, daunting space between the 4% reality of the daily behavioral grind and the extreme financial cost or medical intensity of lifelong injections and surgery.
People just want an easier way.
Exactly. Supplements prey directly on the desperation created by that gap. They offer the illusion of an easy middle ground, a biological shortcut, even when science definitively proves this shortcut is a dead end.
That brings us full circle. We started by cutting through the noise and looking at the clinical reality from the time of Hippocrates up to modern GLP-1 receptor agonists. What the data makes crystal clear is that obesity is a complex, biological, and highly individual chronic condition.
Absolutely.
It is a continuum of physiological risk driven by adipose tissue acting as an inflammatory organ.
It requires a customized, evidence-based medical approach.
Exactly. It is biology, not a moral failing. And understanding the mechanics of that biology, knowing that shedding just 10% of your body weight can shrink your fat cells enough to stop the inflammatory reign and drop your cardiovascular risk by 20% is incredibly empowering.
It really is.
Even if that 10% loss doesn't result in the 30% aesthetic transformation you see on Instagram, the clinical reality is that you are saving your own life. Whether you're prepping for a doctor's consultation or just fascinated by the science, knowing how your body actually works changes the entire conversation.
And it forces us to look toward a radically different future. The clinical source notes that even more efficacious pharmacotherapies are currently in development.
More than tirzepatide.
Yes. Next-generation drugs that might safely and reliably replicate the 40% weight loss of major bariatric surgery with a simple weekly injection.
That's just wild to think about.
Which leaves us with a really profound question to consider. If we are rapidly approaching an era where we can biologically override human appetite at will, how will that permanently change human evolution?
Oh.
How will it alter our fundamental relationship with food? And perhaps most importantly, how will it finally force society to dismantle its long-held, unscientific biases about willpower and body size?
That is a staggering thought to leave on. Suddenly, that muddy diagnostic landscape we talked about at the top of the deep dive isn't just getting clearer. The whole map is being redrawn right before our eyes. We are going from just putting buckets under the leaks to handing everyone a biological hammer and a brand new roof. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.